Thank you. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Everybody doing all right? Everybody well rested, nice and awake? So, I'm not. I had to watch my brother's dogs last night. It's a dachshund and a beagle. They're adorable until 4 in the morning. So, here to talk about fables. Well, not fables plural, but fable in particular. A rather famous one. It's been around for a couple of centuries. It's the story of Henny Lenny. Not familiar?
Yeah.
Sorry, let's try again. Chicken Licken?
Yeah.
Little more familiar. Chicken Little. The story of Chicken Little, as we know it, existed in the year 1860 when it was published. That was the first time that the story was published under that title. Previously known to that under different translations, it was known as Henny Lenny, Chicken Licken, whatever. But the story that we know as Chicken Little was not around until the mid-19th century. The story of Chicken Little, the story of the tiny chicken who thought that the apocalypse was bearing down on him because he was convinced that, according to the famous line, that the sky was falling. Different versions of the story usually center around the same theme, where he's standing under a tree and a piece of debris, a branch, an acorn, an apple, something like that, falls off the tree and bops him on the head. And because of this instance, he's convinced that the sky is falling. And so Chicken Little, travels all over the kingdom, acquiring animal friends, convincing them that the sky is falling, and they must tell the king, and they must warn the king that the sky is falling. And truth be told, I'm not that big of a fan of the Chicken Little story, but the phrase, the sky is falling, is something I use on almost a daily basis. Because it is my analogy, it is my circumstance for things have gone wrong. I used it probably about a dozen times last week. Tim, how are things going on the project? Dude, the sky's falling. It's coming right down. So... And, most people get the reference. I had a few people ask me what that meant. I'm like, it means things are bad. We had a bad week at work last week. It was a rather terrible week. We're shorthanded. We had a couple of things different things going on. We had a driver get into an accident here in Gaithersburg, and 5 minutes before I clocked out, I was told I needed to go pick him up. Now, quick point of reference, I do not work in Gaithersburg. I work in Capitol Heights, which is a few miles outside of D.C. So, 3 hours later, after navigating through rush hour traffic, I managed to get him back to the branch safely and get home before dark. And so, it was one of those weeks where I really felt like the sky was falling. There were many things going wrong. I did things last week that aren't really my job. We are short on drivers, so I became a driver last week. And I went to Fairfax, and I went to D.C., and I went to Southern Maryland. And I saw a lot of Maryland this week. By the way, Southern Maryland, Mechanicsville, that's a nice area down there. I would not mind living down there one day. That's a nice, peaceful place to live, Mechanicsville. And so I had this attitude that the sky was falling, and it's just an expression I use, and that's why I wanted to talk about Chicken Little for just a minute before we get to the scripture. The story of Chicken Little, like I said, is about this chicken who goes around telling everybody that the sky is falling. And people, for some reason or another, accept this philosophy at face value. I don't know what kind of credentials Chicken Little had, but apparently he could go up to another animal and be like, "Hey, the sky is falling." And they're like, "Really? Well, I guess we better get on this." And so him and his band of animal companions round up, and they go out and they go to tell the king about the sky falling. The story has a couple of different endings. The more traditional one, the happy ending, revolves around the idea of courage and not being a chicken and not being afraid. The original ending, the more, because if you guys read fables, like old fables or like Grimm's fairy tales or anything like that, these stories do not traditionally have happy endings, as we know them today in what I like to call the Disney generation. The bad ending to Chicken Little, I won't go into the details about it, but the moral of that is you shouldn't accept things at face value. Just because someone comes up and says that the sky is falling, you shouldn't inherently just immediately buy into that circumstance, which is relevant to today. There's a couple of different groups going around talking about the sky is falling, and they're all over the news or the internet or whatever media they choose. One group in particular owns a bunch of radio stations, and they're heralding in the end of the world, which is coming up soon. By the way, I'll post that date on the website, so just don't make plans. All right, today we're looking at Matthew chapter 6. Speaking of the sky is falling, we're looking at Matthew chapter 6. Matthew 6, part of the Sermon on the Mount, world's most famous sermon in Christianity. Love the Sermon on the Mount because it's Jesus establishing guidelines, talking about how to live your life, how to, what to value and how to treat your enemies and how to be a peaceful person. And he goes through all these really amazing points while he's talking to this crowd of people on the Sermon on the Mount. The only drawback is that was the first sermon of Christianity, and it has been impossible to follow up since then. Try as we might, ministers are completely incapable of looking at the Sermon on the Mount and go, yeah, I can do better. It's not going to happen. And so Jesus, setting the prime example, he talks about how to pray. The Lord's Prayer comes out of the Sermon on the Mount. He talks about how to pray, and he establishes all these great guidelines. And at the end of Matthew chapter 6, he talks about the section talking about people who worry. All right, so what we're looking at, to start off, is Matthew 6, verses 25 through 29. Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat or drink, or about your body, what you will wear. Is not life more than food, and the body more than clothes? Look at the birds of the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they? Can any one of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your life? And why do you worry about clothes? See how the flowers of the field grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you that not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. Now, the style of the Sermon on the Mount is not what we have as an established church today. What it is you're talking about thousands of people gathered and just sitting quietly and listening to Jesus talk as he just walks around and he talks to people. And he just talks to them very directly. And he uses this passage about how we should not worry about things that go on in our lives. We shouldn't worry about food or clothes or the circumstances on our lives. And I thought of a great example relevant to this. I thought about the idea of 5 o'clock in the morning. Now, I don't know how many of you guys are up at 5 o'clock in the morning, but I'm one of those people. And granted, during the work week, I'm not the most chipper person at 5 in the morning. I grumble and I stumble around, I kind of get my bearings, and I get my caffeine, and I get in the car, and I start the drive to work. And I don't really stop to think about the world around me. Because Jesus talks about the birds of the air, and he talks about the flowers of the fields. And he talks about how not even King Solomon was dressed such as one of these. And you think about those old cliches, those old stop and smell the roses, and things among that nature that we as society regard as cheesy or pointless or meaningless. But the other morning, after this really bad day, I got home late, I eaten dinner late. I try not to eat fast food during the week, and I definitely did the night I was coming home late because I didn't feel like cooking. And I get up at 5 in the morning, and I walk outside, and it is just perfect. It was cold, it was damp, it was cloudy, but I don't know what it was. It was perfect. I didn't know what it was, because every day I work, I pray for peace. Every day. Because in our lives we have these jobs that are just aggravating. That are just terrible. We have these stresses that we deal with on a daily basis. And every day I pray for peace. And every day I think about Matthew chapter 6. I think about this passage where I can't get through the day without praying for peace. Because if I'm left to my own devices, I will go absolutely insane, and I will probably just kill somebody at work. We have those days where I very distinctly recall trying to will fire from my eyes. Someone had made me really angry, and he turned his back, and I just stared for a minute. I'm going to feel really bad because this is going to be the day. This is going to be the day that fire is going to shoot out my eyes, and I'm going to feel really guilty about it. And so we have these moments where, left to our own devices, we cave into the stress. We cave into it. We refuse to see the world around us. There are plenty of mornings where I get up at 5 in the morning. I'm like, I hate morning. It could be the most peaceful morning and birds could be singing, but if I'm not in a good mood, I'm going to completely ignore that. I'm going to completely ignore the fact that it is just a beautiful morning. All right, the Sermon on the Mount is the most overused and underappreciated reference in the New Testament. It is so easy to look at these things that Jesus talks about so many great things in this passage. He talks about how to live your life and how to pray and how to treat your enemies. How to treat people. And, incidentally, there is no passage about willing fire from your eyes and setting your enemies on fire. So, quick point of reference, I was in the wrong there. I'm a big person, I can admit that. I shouldn't have tried to will fire from my eyes. And so, Jesus talks about all these amazing things, but in this passage in particular, he talks about the idea of setting worry aside. Because how many of us can add a day to our life by stacking worry on top of it? And I know what you're thinking. Hypocrite. Right here. It's okay to think it. I'm not the world's most chipper person. I have my bad days. I have my really bad days. I can definitely attest to that. I'm behind on my work. I got a ton of stuff I got to do tomorrow. And you know what? I'm going to put it out. I'm going to put it out of my head because of this next passage. Starting in verse 30. If that is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, will he not much more clothe you, you of little faith? So do not worry, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we wear? For the pagans run after all these things, and your heavenly Father knows that you need them. Now, what this passage, what does this have to do with our daily life? It's talking about food. Sure, we're going to have food. You can go to Walmart, you can buy a 6-pack of ramen noodles for 75 cents. There's food. Food is available. We own clothes. I've had bad days with clothes. I've had days where I've had to throw on that worn out pair of jeans I swear I'd never wore again, but just haven't thrown away. But you know what? They're clothes. They're there. They get me through the day. But this passage goes so much farther beyond that, because it's talking about putting worry aside. So Jesus might as well have been saying, do not worry about getting those reports in on time. Do not worry about your supervisor yelling at you. Do not worry about your underlings not getting the job done. Do not worry about all the stresses that are piling up. He might as well have said those things. Because in this passage, he's talking directly to us just the same as he talked to those people thousands of years ago. I love the idea of the Sermon on the Mount because it's Jesus walking and talking and speaking the truth. And I can imagine he would get down beside someone who he knew was going through the stresses, and he just looks them in the eyes and says, do not worry. Do not let this stress overtake you. And you know what? Even if this message inspires you, and even if this changes your life and you go out of here with a great attitude, you know what? You're probably going to have a bad day tomorrow. Or at some point during the week, or in the next couple of weeks, because we can't evade them. We can't evade those days where we have stress and we have too much to deal with. What we can do is we can accept the fact that it is beyond our measure as people to deal with it. As people, we are flawed. We are sinful people who cave into this, who look at the stress and just give in to the worry. And like I said, I pray for peace every day, because if I didn't pray for peace, I'd be in a lot of trouble. I would be in a lot of trouble, because it is so easy to cave into that, to give into it. Looking at verse 33. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own. The number one fault of people who worry is the future. We plan 5, 6, 7 steps ahead because we have to. We have to worry about that. It doesn't matter. Today is not that bad. Wednesday is going to be terrible. I've got a meeting on Wednesday. I've got things I've got to worry about. I've got people. I've got responsibilities I'm in charge of. And if I don't take care of it by Wednesday, then I'm absolutely going to cave in, and the sky will fall down. You don't have to say it. You don't have to think it. You don't have to think of that phrase directly. But that is exactly what you're thinking. I see it every day in my job. I see people who get so overwhelmed with the future. When something doesn't get done, we have to immediately worry about this customer who might close his account with us, and we might have to lay off more people. And we went through that already. We had furlough days, and we had to lay people off, and it was terrible. And everybody was on edge, and nobody was in a good mood. And we're just now starting to come out of that, but we still worry about the future. We still worry about tomorrow and Tuesday and Wednesday and 7 weeks from now when we've got something else going on. And we have to accept the fact that we can't deal with it ourselves. It's not possible. You have to let it go. I was talking about Chicken Little earlier. I was talking about his credentials, in which he goes around talking about how the sky is falling. Speaking of credentials. All right, when we look at the story of Chicken Little, we look at what started it. It was a sharp, quick pain. An acorn, let's just say it's an acorn fell upon his head and struck him, and he looked up and he didn't see anything, so the only logical conclusion was the sky is falling. I don't know how the sky got credentials. It's a fable. We'll let it go. Fables have outrageous circumstances. But it was a quick, sharp pain that started this attitude that the sky was falling. And although acorns don't fall on our heads on a daily basis, it sure feels like it. One small problem, one little tiny problem gets us going. Because that rolls into something else and we start worrying about later on. Now, I mentioned the word credentials. Because there's something that we overlook in the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount, the first sermon within Christianity, was performed, was spoken by Jesus, by the Son of God. The man who lived, the man who died, the man who was resurrected, the man who was God, talked about not worrying. And you know what we do as people that we're good at? We backburner things really easily. We backburner Scripture or reading our Bible or any kind of studying or really think about what Jesus said. But I want you to think about this. Sermon on the Mount was spoken by the Son of God. The Son of God came down from heaven. He was born and he lived this life so he could tell you not to worry. Think about it for a second. Those are some credentials right there. The Son of God gets down and he looks at this person. He looks at this person who is you. There's a person in the crowd who's worrying. And he gets down and he takes their hand and he says, do not worry. Which one of us can add a single day to our lives by worrying? Why worry about tomorrow? Today has enough trouble of its own. Don't worry about tomorrow. Just don't. Just let it go. And you know what? This is something that I've subscribed to. I'm done worrying about tomorrow. He's right. Today's got enough trouble of its own. You've got something going on back there. You're thinking about it right now. It's not prominent. It's not in the front of your head. I would like to think you're listening. You guys listening? Oh, good. Huh? Funny. Hilarious. But there's something back there. There's something back there, like in the back. Just kind of on the back burner of the stove right there that you've got to deal with today. It's there. Tax season's coming up. I haven't done my taxes. I'm young and impulsive and foolish, and I haven't done my taxes yet. So that's there. That's back there. Got to make sure that gets taken care of. But there's something back there. And you know what? Let it go. Enjoy this time. We cave into stress so much as people, and the Son of God tells us not to. Don't worry about it. Things will be okay. And you know what? That's the thing that we don't want to hear. When you're in that moment, when you're in that stress, you don't want to hear everything's going to be okay. You don't want to hear God has a plan or anything along that. You just want to worry. You want to worry because on some really weird level, it makes us feel better. It does, because we feel we're justified in our anger. I'm allowed to be angry. No, you're not. Sorry, guys. Jesus said no. Well, you're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to stress about it. But the thing that it boils down to is you have to let it go. You have to. It's so hard to do. But you know what? Jesus said you can do it, and the Bible states many examples about how we can do anything if Christ wills it. If God wills it to be done, it will be done. It's irrefutable. It's impossible to stop. Just let it go, guys. Jesus wants you to let it go. Just don't worry about it. It's such an amazing, radical concept that we will not be able to grasp ultimately. But when we need it, and you guys know when you need it. Like, it doesn't matter if you do it every day. It doesn't matter if you pray for peace every day. When you need it, when the sky is falling down on you and it seems like your world is coming to a close, it doesn't matter what else is going on in the world. You've got this conflict to deal with. Just remember Matthew 6. Just let it go. And like I said, you don't have to do it every day because we're not going to. We're going to stress. We're going to worry. We're going to have things in the back of our mind going on. But when it counts, let it go. Just let it go. Realize that things will be all right and God has a plan for you. And just let it go. And if you subscribe to this philosophy, if you believe that Jesus was the Son of God, and if you believe His credentials are true, and if you believe that you should not worry, and you want to come forward, or you want to get something off your chest, if you've got that worry and you have to let it go, then let it go. Let it go by praying to God privately. Let it go by bringing it forth to the congregation for prayers. Whatever you have to do, just let it go. Don't live with it. Don't live with it for another day. Just find a way to give it to God and just let it go. And realize that His plan goes so much farther than beyond what we plan. It doesn't matter if we plan 5 or 6, 7, or 7 steps ahead. God's way past that. God is so far past that, and He sees all the good things through the bad. And I ask you to take these things into your heart. Just ponder them. Just have it there for a minute. We're just going to take a minute, and we're just going to let it go. And I ask that as you consider this, as you decide if you want to let it go, because that's what it boils down to, is there's a want there. We have to want to let it go. We have to accept the fact that it is beyond our station to deal with these things. And if you can accept that, if you can let it go, then let it go. Just let it be gone, let it be done. And please just keep these things in your heart as we stand and sing the song of invitation.
Alas, ended my